It was a Thursday morning when I first got the call from my son, Brian. His voice trembled slightly, something I hadn't heard in him since he was a teenager, afraid to tell me he'd scraped the side of the neighbor's car. But this time, he wasn't a nervous kid. He was a grown man, 28 years old, working full-time at a law firm downtown in Seattle. He'd landed the job right after finishing his master's degree, and though it wasn't the highest-paying position, it was a solid start. Brian had always been careful, always planned, always made sure things were lined up before taking the next step. So when I heard that small shake in his voice, my heart immediately went into overdrive. "Mom," he said, "can you come downtown today? I need to talk to you about something. Something happened at work." Of course I said yes. I asked him if he was okay, and he said, "Yeah, kind of." That didn't sit right with me. Kind of. That could mean anything from a minor disagreement to something much, much worse. I asked if he was in trouble. He said no, but he didn't elaborate. I dropped everything and got into my car, hands shaking slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. When I arrived downtown, I found him waiting for me outside the Starbucks across from his building. He wore a dress shirt and slacks, but his collar was unbuttoned and he looked like he hadn't slept all night. His brown hair was a little disheveled, and his usually neat appearance had given way to a kind of anxious slump. As soon as he saw me, he stood up quickly and waved me over. He didn't hug me right away, which was unusual for him. Instead, he motioned toward the back of the coffee shop where it was quiet. Once we sat down, he leaned forward and said in a low voice, "Something happened with my boss, Mr. Aldridge. He asked to speak with me in private yesterday. Now, I've heard about workplace dynamics, the kind of power plays that sometimes happen behind closed doors. I braced myself for what might come next." He shut the door, Brian continued, "and I thought maybe it was about the Hastings file. I've been managing that case, and there've been a few hiccups with the documents, but nothing serious." Instead, he asked me about Dad. That caught me off guard. My late husband, Brian's father, had passed away 5 years ago after a long battle with cancer. He'd been a schoolteacher for 30 years and never had any connection to law or business. I blinked. "What does your father have to do with your job?" "That's the thing," Brian said. I didn't know either. Mr. Aldridge looked at me and said, "Brian, were you aware that your father once helped my younger brother out of a really dangerous situation?" I had no idea what he was talking about. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. I never remembered my husband mentioning anything like that, and we were married for over 2 decades. "Are you sure he had the right person?" Brian nodded. He said it happened a long time ago, back in 2002. His younger brother, Tom Aldridge, got into some kind of trouble when he was in high school. Drugs, fights, possible arrest. Apparently, Dad was working at a youth program that Tom got referred to as part of a court-mandated community service. Dad worked with him privately, mentored him, kept him from dropping out of school. The way Mr. Aldridge told it, Dad might have saved Tom's life. I felt my breath catch. I had no idea my husband had done something like that. He'd always been quiet about those kinds of things, never one to boast or even mention them. But I knew he cared deeply about his students, especially the troubled ones. I felt a swell of pride and sadness in my chest at the same time. Brian wasn't done. Mr. Aldridge said he never forgot what Dad did. He said Tom turned his life around, went to college, and now runs a non-profit that helps at-risk teens. And he told me he wants to honor that debt. "What do you mean?" I asked, still trying to process everything. "He offered me a promotion," Brian said quietly. "A big one. Partner track. Double my current salary. It's completely out of the blue. I'm not even the senior-most associate. I'm not supposed to be on track for something like that for at least 3 more years. But he said he believes in me and he believes in paying forward the kindness shown to his family." I stared at him. "And how do you feel about that?" Brian looked down at his coffee. "I feel conflicted. I don't want special treatment because of something Dad did. I want to earn it. But at the same time, I can't stop thinking about what Dad might say. He never wanted recognition, but he always said good deeds echo. And I think this is one of those echoes." We sat there for a long moment, letting the words settle. My mind was still swimming, trying to recall if my husband had ever mentioned a student named Tom or any program like the one Brian described. Maybe he had and I just hadn't paid attention, distracted with life's chaos. Or maybe he'd kept it to himself, just like he kept every student's story sacred, private, personal. I reached across the table and put my hand over Brian's. I think your father would be proud. Not just because of what his actions led to, but because you're thinking so carefully about what's right. Brian finally smiled, though it was small and fleeting. Mr. Aldridge said something else before I left his office. He said, "I'm not doing this to repay a debt. I'm doing it because people like your father deserve to have their legacy continued." Then he said, "The way you work, the way you treat people, it reminds me of him." Tears sprang to my eyes. My throat tightened. For a moment, I couldn't say anything at all. That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself in the attic, rifling through old boxes of photographs, letters, and papers. I finally found a folder labeled Lincoln High Youth Program, 2002. Inside were notes in my husband's handwriting. Names, schedules, progress reports. And there it was, Tom Aldridge. My husband had kept detailed notes about his progress. How he struggled in the beginning, how he resisted help, how he nearly got expelled but managed to pull his grades up. And a final note that read, "He's starting to believe he's not beyond saving." That's the key. I sat there on the attic floor for what felt like hours, tears rolling down my cheeks. I had loved my husband deeply, but in that moment, I realized I still hadn't known the full depth of who he was. And now, years later, his quiet act of kindness was coming back in the most unexpected way. The next day, Brian called again. He'd made his decision. He accepted the promotion, but with a condition. He asked Mr. Aldridge if, in lieu of a signing bonus, they could make a donation to Tom's non-profit in his father's name. Mr. Aldridge agreed without hesitation. A week later, Brian stood in front of a small crowd at a luncheon hosted by the non-profit. He shared the story, carefully and respectfully, about his father's role in Tom's life and how that act of mentorship had rippled into the present. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. I stood in the back, hands clasped over my chest, watching my son speak with quiet strength, dignity, and grace. He wasn't just stepping into a new chapter of his career. He was stepping into the kind of man his father had been.